Our first clinician today is Dr. Benny Bolden. Dr. Bolden is a native of Miami, Florida, where he received his musical inspiration during his early years of education. Dr. Bolden later graduated from Miami Norland Senior High School, where he was a student of Mr. Kenneth R. Talbert and Mr. Anthony E. Simons III. He majored in music after being encouraged by Mr. Talbert to cultivate the gift that God has given him to touch the lives of others. He received his bachelor's degree in music from Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University, where he was a conducting student for Dr. Julian E. White and Dr. Shelby R. Chipman. Dr. Bolden later received his master's degree in educational leadership and his Doctor of Education degree with a concentration in higher education. Dr. Bolden was named in Who's Who amongst teachers and received a proclamation from the City of Miami mayor for his excellence in service, among many other honors. Dr. Bolden has served as a director of bands at Bellevue Middle School in Tallahassee, Florida, director of bands and PAVAC department chair at Miami Northwestern Senior High School, and director of bands at Barron Collier High School, where he developed it into one of the finest band programs in the country. Bands under his direction consistently earn superior ratings at all levels of evaluation. Under his leadership, Dr. Bolden bands have performed for past President of the United States, Barack Obama, the Latin Billboard Music Awards, Governor's Rick Scott Inaugural Parade, NFL Super Bowl, Carnegie Hall in New York, Grand National Adjudicators Invitational, and was invited to perform as a featured band in the prestigious Music for All Music Festival. Dr. Bolden is an active adjudicator and highly sought guest conductor and clinician. Currently, Dr. Bolden is the principal at R. Frank Nims Middle School in Tallahassee. Furthermore, Dr. Bolden is an ordained elder and active member of the Family Worship and Praise Center. Dr. Bolden is married with 3 lovely children. With no further ado, speaking on arts matters and the pursuit of acceptance in today's education framework, please welcome Dr. Benny Bolden. Good afternoon, Dr. Bolden.
Thank you very much. Halfway through the introduction, I was going, who is that he's talking about? But I appreciate the opportunity to come and present today. Just special thank you to the Nat King Cole Generation Hope Incorporation, the Cole sisters, as well as Mr. Edrick Rhodes, and all that we're doing throughout the United States to really push arts education and performing arts. I have to say this, I, as a teacher at Miami Northwestern Senior High School, is a recipient of the scholarship that they provided and provided my students 12 years ago to today, or in September, with $20,000 worth of equipment. And so I am, this is wow for me to turn around and now present at the conference after receiving that so many years ago. So I appreciate the Nat King Cole Generation Hope Incorporation. I do want to go ahead and start my PowerPoint, make sure that this is coming up. And so today, Performing Arts Matters is the topic, the pursuit of acceptance in today's education framework. Just a little bit about me really quickly. As Mr. Rose indicated, I am a former band director. And I thought to myself, even going through the transition of being a band director, at my particular time frame, most principals in K-12 setting were former coaches. And so it wasn't a huge support system there in the K-12 fabric and the framework in regards to performing arts. And that really pushed me in the direction of where I am today. And so most of my study with my doctoral degree was looking at how we can push the idea of arts education in the curriculum, not only in the K-12 setting, but also in the higher ed level. And so I do serve as a middle school principal, but I also serve as an adjunct professor at Florida State University. And why I did that is because it was synonymous to me to, if we're going to develop teachers to become instructional leaders or principals, then we have to go ahead and have that component of performing arts. We teach them all the time about how to change school grades and, you know, the educational cycle and knowing at-risk students and the mental health. We do a good job with supporting all of those efforts, but performing arts and the importance thereof is not something that is embedded in the curriculum in terms of higher education and people who are going into that area. And so that really started my pursuit in terms of this study. My topic was principal perception of arts education. It's a study of Florida administrators, even though this can be looked at in terms of different states. But this particular study that I did with my doctoral degree was about Florida's administrators, the perception and participation, attitude, and support of arts education. If you really want to see if your principal or your instructional leader supporting the arts, it's important for us to understand their perception, their attitude, and their support of it, not just with what they say, but what they do and how they support it. I just don't want a trumpet. I want a flugelhorn too, and so having that level of support was super important. There's a problem statement. It's not known what the perception, attitude, and level of support of arts education from administrators in the state of Florida. And that really began the breaking point of me and saying, what can I do differently in regards to me getting this doctoral degree to bring a wealth of knowledge and to support this thing that I love. I still love being a band director and prefer to be a band director. Life kind of pushed me in this direction. And when you are doing something for the greater good, it kind of takes you out of your comfort zone and make you do something different. And that's really how I came to become a principal. I'll be honest with you, I would prefer to be a band director today more so than anything, but life kind of took me that way. The significance of the research is the completion of the data gap. You got to join the wealth of knowledge provided in higher education literature in favor of including and supporting arts education, providing an understanding of what principal roles in the continued success of integration of arts into education curriculum. And that is really important, especially when you're talking about Title I schools, which is the whole premise of the Nat King Code Generation Hope Incorporation, is supporting those Title I schools who generally are low performing schools and things of that nature. And I don't want to get ahead of myself, but that is really important in the idea of what it is we're doing. And if we're going to support performing arts in those particular school settings, even though those schools are habitually failing and things of that nature. Actively engaging arts community in ongoing dialogue about its significance in this interest. One of the chief impacts of No Child Left Behind, and it is important for me to note that most of that legislation, the pedagogy behind that was geared towards math, reading, and not necessarily math, but it really looks and focuses on student performance on standardized tests, and then the criterion for which we build our curriculum within the schools. In brief, these acts view students' performance on exams as evidence of a school's effectiveness, which is super important in the idea of whether or not the state says this school is moving in the right direction. Back in the day, they used to say, are you making yearly progress? It's AYP. And a lot of times in those Title I scenarios, what No Child Left Behind did not take into consideration is the fact that these kids come from at-risk situations. They can be socioeconomic disadvantage. It could be a single parent home. It could be financial. And those things are not taken into consideration. There's a research that I looked at, and it talked about how African-American children have know 1 million less words than their Caucasian counterpart by the time they're in the second grade. And that was significant in regards to when you look at Title I schools and then the lackluster of what they don't have. But what we do know is from many, many research that arts education students score better on standardized tests. And so if you don't understand the importance of arts, it's easy for an administrator to walk in the room and say, that is not of importance because we have to teach these kids to read. But we also have to teach, and what's important, and to make sure that all arts educators, the teachers, make sure we engage our administration and principals and let them know the significance of what it is we do will be super significant in the overall grade of the school. And so that's what this research is about. As a result, schools tend to focus on exam preparation as a central area of their operational focus. You know, you come into a school setting and we got to get our reading scores up and we got to get our math scores up, and then arts become a conversation of the side. Thank you for having a band, but it's not where I am. And I remember even as an educator, I had 3 levels of band at Barron Collier High School. My top band can play whatever, collegiate literature, Maslanka's fifth, it didn't matter. We can play anything. But I also had that third band who had to start off at the bare minimum. That's the hot cross buns. And so we're teaching 4/8, not 4/8, but 4/4, 2/4, 3/4, the basic time signatures. And then that top band, because they can play that literature, you're teaching 3/8, 6/8, 12/8, and things of those compound meters. What I start looking at is the research in terms of those students in that high performing group were performing better on the math assessment than those students in my lower band who I was teaching those basic concepts 4/4 time signature. And so I start teaching 2/8, 3/8, and what we saw is a significant change in the math scores because that is simply math in itself. And so that is what I took to my administrator and to show them in terms of research, what we're doing in the classroom and the impact that we're making, not only teaching the arts, but also the significance it has to the overall school grade. Criticism from deriving from these strategies include observation that exam-focused pedagogy models often overlook critical variables that we talked about in terms of student learnings, the single-parent homes and things of that nature. And we just discussed that momentarily. As previously noted, evaluations of effectiveness of art-based education represent historical-oriented issues, as well as concerns that has generated increasing controversy given the current trends in the United States. Educationalists of the generation have noted that arts-based education tends to help foster cognitive development, particularly among those younger children, especially in that pre-K through 6 age range, especially even younger, even that pre-K through 3. These students tend to be evidence-based in nature and viewed from a combined neurological, psychological, and developmental perspective. At the same time, however, these same issues have regained critical importance given the relevance to broader debates concerning the current gaps. And we see that in the achievement gaps in terms of reading and math and the limitations in what we see in education today. All of those things frame these my research questions. How are arts seen? Is it a feasible portion of the curriculum of today, or is it simply accepted as an additional part of the curriculum? These are the questions that haunted me. Is my class significant to the overall structure of the K-12 environment? And is the information being conveyed to the K-12 leaders, the principals, the assistant superintendents, and the superintendents of your district? What is the perception of administrators in the state of Florida as it relates and pertains to arts education and the integration of arts into the curriculum? Does principals' perception, attitude, support have impact on the success of arts program? What role do administrators play in the value of arts education, and to what extent does the attitude of the principal towards fine arts impact the inclusion of arts in school? In that particular thought, it was my belief that low performing areas is seen or accepted as an additional part of the curriculum. What we see is when administrators take over Title I schools that are indicated, regardless of where you are, as a low performing school because of reading and math, most of the time they come in, and what we have saw significantly as a widespread throughout the United States is the cutting of funding for arts education. And that has a lot to do with the fact that they didn't understand the significance of what arts can bring. So the first thing that we do in those Title I settings is to cut the funding of arts education because they do not grasp and understand the importance thereof and how important that is to the curriculum. And so now we have a generation of those who did not play an instrument in school, who never, drew a painting and things of that nature, never went to an art gallery. And that is a historical part of the fabric of education that is super important, culturalistic, regardless of whatever ethnic group you're in, and is super important to the educational foundation. In terms of question number 2, we see the arts as an important factor within the curriculum, but impacts is different depending on the academic structure of the school. And we talked about that just briefly a second ago. It is my belief that principal perception, attitude, and support has significant impact on the success of arts program. I indicated early in my aforementioned statement that a lot of times, especially when I was teaching in the K-12 setting as a teacher, Most of my administrators at that particular time were former coaches. And so the impact they saw was getting kids on the football, getting people in the seats at the football game through the idea of sports, and that would generate funding. The band was a second thought, and if the band came, great. If they didn't come, we won't lose any sleep. And that is the wrong framework to have as it relates to arts education, especially in Title I settings. What roles do administrators play in the value of arts education? It is my belief that administrators plays a significant role in the value of arts education programs and the education thereof. The focus of this study was to investigate the role that principals' implementation of effectiveness of arts education programs in the Florida area schools. The study builds upon broad analysis of principal leader influence and its assumption that positive administrators' attitude can generate similar attitudes among other schools officials, educators, and that goes up the chain in terms of assistant superintendents, area superintendents, and superintendents, and to make sure that we unequivocally support the arts. The role and influence of principals as school system administrators and leaders, and the importance of transformational leadership and guiding and implementing broader forms of education program changes, and the key impacts that principal perception of art programs can have on the success of those particular schools. The study analysis of principle-driven leadership derives from traditional assumptions about this office role in the key areas of education program development and the student educational outcomes, and far more recent analysis of the same issues. The view identifies principals as the primary leaders that assume responsibility in terms of introducing an arts program and in terms of ensuring that they achieve the targeted goal. The impact of principal leaderships on a variety of areas within the school system can help contribute to our understanding of how these administrators might positively impact the implementation of arts program. The view and the idea that a leader can have the most direct form on followers developed through variables of influence, and which is super important. Influence must come from the top down. If it's important to the leader, it will be important to the building. And that was significant to me. And a lot of times as young educators, we go into the room and our artistry and our art form is important to us, but that same zeal and knowledge and excitement about what it is we do each and every day is not shared from the leader in that building. And so it was important for us to change that framework to make sure that the leader owns that level of support too, as well as those arts individuals that's in that building teaching those students. This concept relates directly to a person's influence through power, i.e. through his and her ability to develop programs or regulations that influence internal developments and school policies. This view would accordingly contend that a principal could direct process and influence outcomes related to the implementation of arts program directly by creating these programs and by requiring their inclusions within the school, making this important within the framework of the school. And the view of a principal impacted arts program would view this phenomenon through the perspective of transformational leadership. Assessments will also contribute to the broader question of whether principals' attitude influence arts program outcomes by assessing the quality of principal views and the issues and by analyzing the potential influence through a statistical assessment. And really what I was looking at there is if they did have the support, did that translate in the success of the programs? So if you was a band director or you're a chorus program or you was an art teacher or orchestra teacher and so on and so forth, was your program successful because you had that level of support from that administrator? I did a mixed method research, which is both quantitative and qualitative in study. I wanted to address this research from different ideas. This mixed method design also tend to generate complex forms of data that explore and examine issues from a multidimensional perspective. Since arts educators represent a multi-layered issue, the researchers use this mixed method in my design to serve the purpose to generate complex information that derive from specific memorable set of respondents. So this research was done through survey, the data collection analysis, sampling, interviews, statistical measurements, and as I indicated, both the quantitative and qualitative interviews and things of that nature. I looked at initially, the request was made to 67 districts. We broke it down into 4 different parts. So I had a region 1, region 2, region 3, and region 4. And this particular study looked at just public schools, but this would be a little different if we included, private and charter schools as well. And that is the 67 districts here in the state of Florida. Most of the schools, as you can see in this particular study, were Title I schools. Well, all of them were in particular was Title I schools, but in particularly most of it was middle school, excuse me. 81% of the population that we looked at were middle schools, and 2 were of the respondents was from high schools. In terms of, we ran the whole gamut, so you have both rural and urban schools. We looked at low performing, these are Title I schools, as well as the traditional high performing schools that are in a different kind of setting. And we looked at a gamut of whether or not they are free and they have low school percentage, low income in their area. And we looked at different areas, and that really was the means to the end to understanding what this looked like in different different areas within the city and or state. As I indicated, we looked at both urban and rural schools, so 9 of urban and 2 were rural. So we looked at the principals that were engaged in this dialogue was asking the question, what fine arts background do you have in your personal life? Some of them were as a student. And so, they were involved in arts classes. They was involved in band classes. They was involved as a student in private lessons, or they played in some jazz program or went to a camp. Some of them was a participant. In other words, I went to these events. I didn't necessarily participate as a student in private lessons or things of that nature, but my parents kept me engaged in the arts. Or as a supporter, I was on the outside, I financially supported the idea of arts. And so, and what we see there is those areas. As a current administrator, which of these fine arts experience has had the most influence of understanding? And so you see there, we looked at as a student in the fine arts activity, as a participant within fine arts, and then as a supporter. And so you see significantly the response is at 63%. And so what you're going to see in the correlation of the data is those particular principals supported the arts because they had a understanding of fine arts because they was an active student within it. And then when it really changes from when you get to a participant and then so on and so forth to a supporter. To what extent do you offer fine arts classes? And we looked at how many classes are you necessarily offering in your particular schools. 1 would be green. All of them significantly had at least a program or 2 within their building. And then we get to 3, 4, 5, and 6. When I got to my middle school, it was a Title I school, and currently a Title I school. We offered band and dance on. Since I've been here, I've expanded that thought to band, dance, orchestra, art, and chorus. And I've taken away intensive reading and intensive math. Everything out there will tell you, no, you need to offer intensive reading and intensive math in order to actively engage. But if I'm a student that's struggling with reading and I have a fundamental issue there, giving me and taking away my electives to give me another reading is not going to give me a love for reading. And so you almost have to have the carrot on what is going to get this student to stay. I did a session at a conference talking about repairing your leaks, and really had a picture of a pipe. In 6th grade, you have 100 kids come, and then by 8th grade, 50 of them did not complete 8th grade. And the idea behind that is we have to repair our leaks. And so we have students sitting in a regular ELA general populated class, and then we have them sitting in intensive reading because they are low performing in reading. And then it's the same thing with math. They have a general populated math class, and then we put them in intensive math, There's their two electives, and then they have no outbreak. They have nothing to do in school other than reading and math. And we somehow thought that that was going to generate a love for reading and math. And that was specifically under the No Child Left Behind. Once we took that away, it gave us administrators the right to take those things away. What I saw in my particular school is the attendance went up, the enrollment went up. My school a couple of years ago, we got down to about 230 students. Today, we just shy of 600 because we are actively engaging our kids in a different framework of how we engage students in active reading and active by including the arts in the thought process because it's so closely aligned to math and reading and writing. Please identify what fine arts courses are currently offered at your school. And we talked about the different choices that's there. Most of them, if not all of them, have music. Some of them have arts. Some of them have drama. And some of them have dance, which is all important to the development of the holistic child. And when we relate this to the fabric of education. Fine art opportunities provide outside the school within a 60-mile radius. So we looked at do you have in your area, in your school zone, opportunities for the school to engage in fine arts activity? And you can see one of the schools have none. Again, it's that thought process. If it's important to the community, if it's important to that leader, it's important to that area, we will make sure that we expose our students, our community to that resource. How often do you participate in fine arts experiences outside the school within a 60-mile radius from your school? And we ask each of these areas once a month, once a week, once a month, twice a year. And we saw that to be significant, or at least 4 times a year. We start to see a decline in those areas. And again, if I correlated this to how often have you went to an athletic event, those numbers would have been off the charts. And so it's that active engagement to making sure that we are still connected very much to the arts. Again, is that if the leader is look at this as important, then that particular thought process will flow throughout this building. Our fine arts opportunities provided outside the school beyond a 60-mile radius from your school. And again, the information, it correlates to the other aforementioned question that almost correlates to that. How often do you participate in fine arts experiences outside the school beyond a 60-mile radius from your school? And again, we ask the same questions once a week, once a month, at least twice a year, at least 4 times a year, and then once a year or not at all. And that's super important as well. So what it really said to me is even when families travel or when we leave, are we going on a vacation? Is there some kind of arts related activity that we engage? You know, it's not just going to the park, to the theme park. Are we doing something that actively engage the arts? Are we going to an art gallery and things of that nature? And that's the reasoning for that. How often do you participate in fine arts experience beyond a 60-mile radius? Please select the one answer. And it's the same concept. Again, most of them in those rural areas, say not at all, once a year, at least 4 times a year, twice a year, once a month, and so on and so forth. I use a Likert to measure the 6-point scales, and it really went from strongly disagree, moderately disagree, and so on and so forth. On the other side, I wanted to get some responses from those administrators and to answer some of those important questions. How important are fine arts in your experience, and why do you believe it's important? And here we have some of the responses. I believe fine arts education is extremely important to teaching the whole child, which we find in this study is true. Fine arts is essential to the development of young minds and help to shape the ideas I now have. I believe is important as an historical viewpoint of education system, culture, and history. Music helps build skills that are applicable to the academic as well as life skills. Fine arts are important because it provides an avenue of self-expression as well as development of critical thinking skills. Fine arts also allows the development and relationship and the understanding of collaborative effort. I would add on to that is it opens the idea of creativity, which we have stunned a lot of that growth, which is why we see a lot of mental health and things of that nature. The expression of thought, the expression to share, A lot of our kids don't have those opportunities, especially when there is no arts within that framework, which allows that level of creativity. And it's very important. As a young man, I was able to find myself to learn expressing ideas. As a band director, it taught me many lessons in leadership and prepared me to be a visionary leader. It taught me importance of developing relationships. Do you believe there's any correlation between arts and academic achievement? And do you believe fine arts should be the core curricular study? Why or why not? There's definitely correlation between arts and academic achievement. Every student has the ability to excel in the area of arts education. It is our job as educators to find what students excel at best. And this is one of the reasons why I took away those intensive reading, intensive math classes, to give them that opportunity to excel with having that outlet. And because there is no study that suggests that, all the studies said, hey, we need to do these intensive reading, intensive math. But what the study did not say, that we've seen significant growth. There is no study that suggests intensive math and intensive reading has significant impact on a school grade. None whatsoever. We did these things without the research indicating that it was actually effective. But what we do know, and we can say, because the data is there, that fine arts and performing arts significantly increases the idea of of the academic success of schools when they are actively engaged. That is data that is tangible and touchable. Yes, due to social and academic skills provided within the academic domain, I believe arts is a part of thorough education. It is significant to research to support the thought, do lead the charge at the school district to ensure it was a core curricular study. I believe for many students that are involved in the arts, there is a correlation. The role of the parents, the instructor of the program, resilience and interest of the student also play a role in the outcome. What role do you believe administrators play in the idea of the support of fine education within this K-12 framework? The administrators play a critical role. Supporting arts education will only make your school stronger. The most important role administrators can make is or break a music program through scheduling and funding. Super important, and this is true. When we engage in intensive reading and intensive math classes, all of that kills your performing arts. It takes away from the idea of what the kids can take. And so if you breathe life into your arts program and you breathe life into your grade, you have to take those things off so that you give those programs a fighting chance. I've been at Title I schools and I wanted to get these students into my program and say, hey, this is a very good saxophone player. He has a really good chance of becoming and getting a full scholarship. And they said, well, he can't take your class because he has to take intensive reading and intensive math. And somehow believe that it's going to support the idea of academic engagement. And so that's super important, the scheduling and funding. Administrators must provide opportunities to have students participate in quality fine arts classes. I believe it is foundational to and in existence within the K-12 walls. The support of a principal shapes the success of arts program within the school. Administrators are critical in promoting vision, encouraging success, similar in parents of a child. They will value the place and importance of what adults or administrators place value on, as we indicated throughout this particular study. What do you believe fine arts will fit in the K-12 education in the next 5 years? I don't see a major shift in arts education places without strong leadership that allowed arts program to be implemented, hopefully are on the decline. There is a big push for mental health education right now in our country, and that needs to include educating the whole child, which is crazy because this particular research was done 2 years ago, or 2.5 years ago, and yet this is still very much part of the language of today's issues, especially within increasing factors of testing. I believe fine arts will be placed in classes in our country. We're experiencing middle school redesign. I believe it's the beginning of a change, and that idea of what middle school will look like. And we now moving over into CTE, career and tech ed, getting kids college and career ready. And that is a big push in what we have now in the K-12 framework. It's supported within the budget. I believe it is still be valuable. However, unsupported, like we've seen in recent years, will be the beginning of the end. I oftentimes look at human resource development, PAT systems and things of that nature in terms of jobs that's available. I am originally from Miami, Florida, and schools that used to be powerhouses back in the day when I was in high school. So high school programs, great band programs, travel the world and things of that nature. Every year looking for a band director if they even offer the program anymore. I think we'll continue to see an attention being given to finance in the way of school district promoting them based upon their individual district visions. Mental health and physical education seems to be at the forefront now. I don't know if that will change within the next 5 years, given the current climate. What we have seen is research does not support the researcher's hypothesis. Research support the researcher's hypothesis in regards to what is the perception of administrators, because we do see that, and we did get that information. Does principal perception, attitude, and support have an impact on the success of the program? We found that to be true. What roles do administrators play in the value of arts education? We found that to be true. And to what extent does attitudes of the principals in terms of the inclusion of arts education, we found that to be true. The limitations on the program, the weakness correlated within design, namely that includes it implicitly relevance and participant feedback to generate and present data within the study, resulted in deriving from these 11 participants included the observation of other respondents that could have contributed to the data if more individuals would have been a part of that study. Understand primary weakness also accounted for its primary limitation, specifically that out of 11 out of the 16 within the various regions responded. The researchers sought to address these limitations by identifying points of diversity and making sure that we did both rural and urban areas. In conclusion, the choice of research tools ensured that the investigator was able to produce manageable information forms that express and describe various elements of the perception of the problem by the respondents. The tool also produced results that can be compared efficiently to demonstrate significant points of association between the compiled and analyzed data. And finally, the data collection and analysis method attempted to evaluate data sets based on the specific information they produce while using comparative evaluation methods to combine their results. And before I close out and have a dialogue, I just wanted to kind of give you my information in case you are at a K-12 setting at a Title I school and you would like for me to speak to your principal and talk to you in terms of active engagement in that and the support thereof, I will be open to that. I send letters all over the United States to individuals who continue to connect with me and to make sure that we give the significant information so that we all can be successful. Because if we lose arts education, we lose together.
Wow, thank you, Dr. Bolden. That was some just incredible research and just eye-opening, but real facts that as a former band director myself, and when I speak about this, you know, my dad was a band director, his two brothers were band directors, my brother's a band director, and to make the connection, my dad was a band director at Miami Northwestern High School and a part of the payback program. So I know the program extremely well and the work you've done. So to have this data here, it was just exceptional. The floor is open, virtual floor is open. If you have any questions, feel free to send my way via the tech chat box, and I'll just go through as many as I can. But I'll go ahead and get the questions started here. You know, and I just took some notes as you were speaking, Dr. Bolden. When we talk about the principal perception, attitude, support, being a band director, middle school, high school, now being a principal and then teaching in upper leadership, you know, the perception, attitude, support again, how has that changed in your current position now? Or has it ever changed? That's, you know, where are you with that?
I think it has changed. It has changed significantly because now you have, you know, band directors, let me say it like this, band directors in the generation before me was a longevity job. You know, you would become a band director and stay a band director. You never really went up the assistant principal and principal. So it opened the idea of sports individuals, coaches to become that principal. Now you're seeing band directors who are now moving up the ranks to sit in this particular seat as a principal, and that has changed. That has created that shift. And so we see those individuals, and not necessarily just band directors. These are art teachers who are moving into administration. These are people who taught drama, and that has had a significant shift on what it is we do within the K-12 setting. We still have those principals who have not touched the arts, have not been a part of the arts, and very much still in these leadership roles. And we see those programs, those middle schools that don't have a band, don't have art, don't have chorus, and they will never see the significance thereof. And so when I do have an opportunity, especially in my district, and we look at some of those schools, I oftentimes have that active engagement and say, if you really want your scores to come up, you need to actively engage in the arts. So yes, we're seeing those shifts because you have individuals like myself and like you who have now went out of the, dropped the baton, so to speak, to get into an area of administration to make sure that the language that is important to so that arts does not become an extinction, we are doing those things. We're being a part of that conversation. And I have to say this, not to date myself, but Mr. Rhodes' father was my band director in middle school, which is crazy how this is all connected and stuff. So.
You just dated ourselves on
Yeah,
that.
I know. Wait a minute.
All right, we have a question here. Let me just kind of get through a couple. What advice would you have to strengthen your music programs when your administrators are quietly making cuts, such as not replacing music teachers that are retiring or adding more and more to teachers' schedule when they're already full? Thank you, Lisa, for that question.
Thank you, Lisa, for the question. And that goes back to what we indicated. We have to inform our administrators and how important. Start using the conversation of not band is important, but let me show you how band is important to what it is you're trying to do. You're trying to move the school grade. This is how my writing in my class is supporting what we do. So there is some time that we can engage in writing in our class. I know as a band director, former band director, I want to get in front, I want to get them on the instruments, but we can actively engage in writing. Or we can look at what we talked about early in my dialogue when I was in a different school district where I looked at the correlation of math with my top band, my top wind symphony, and then my lowest band. And I sent that to my administrator and say, look at the correlation, look at what's happening with these math scores with these kids because I've now introduced compound meters. So I'm still teaching band, but I just correlated to a conversation that's now palatable enough for my administrator to swallow, and then they have to give a serious look at it. So I'm no longer coming in the room going band, band, band. I'm going math, 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 even though I'm talking about band. And so that conversation changes the idea of how they support it and how they really engage in making sure that you get what you need in order to be successful, because ultimately you are helping them in the ultimate goal of moving that school grade. And so what I often tell my arts teachers is create a problem for me. Create a problem, get more kids in there. And once you get more kids in there, talk to them about how we're going, tell me how you increasing writing, how you increasing reading, and what are you doing in order to combat math. And in that, I have been a Title I school in a low performing area where most of my feeder pattern elementary schools were D's and F's, and I have maintained an academic C for the last 4 years. That is very difficult to do when 2 years ago, my 6th grade class, I had 215 of them, 117 had already been retained once. That's not even twice. So when you're getting those kids in and you already starting all over again, coming from a DF school, but yet my arts teachers are actively engaged, what does that do for the esprit de corps of the building? Your ELA teachers are going, man, the music teacher is helping us. They called me about what I need to be looking at in writing. And yes, we don't want to take away the idea of what it is we do, our craft, what is so sacred to us, but we have to find a way to actively engage what it is we do with the vision of the school. And it's difficult then for that principal to turn away the idea of performing arts.
Absolutely. You might have answered this somewhat already, but I'm going to just ask this question. We have someone that just asked me to ask you, what is the most effective way to change the minds of administrators about the importance of music education? I found that numbers and studies don't necessarily sway my administration in the past, and they continue to just cut the arts.
Yeah, I was a part of that conversation too, because I would come in the room and going, I need $10,000. Well, you lost me already. But we don't have no money. I get that. I get that argument, and I've been on both sides of the argument. But I would tell you to go in the room and change the framework. Instead of asking for money, ask, how can I, as an educator, support what it is your vision is? Change the game, put them on the hot seat on what you can do in your classroom. Now, you're not a reading teacher, you're not a math teacher, but this is what I can do. Here is how I align my curriculum this year to meet the needs of the vision. And I'm going to do a study at the end of the year to see the correlation of how I am significantly helping the school. The Title I school that I was at Miami Northwestern, which I was also, again, the recipient of the Nat King Cole Generation Hope scholarship at the time when we got the money in the instruments, $20,000 worth of equipment. That school was a F school when I got there. It was a Title I school. We went from, in 2 years, went from an F to a B. In that particular research that I was doing then, I talked about writing and reading. And so on every Friday, we did a study on professional musicians, composers, and things of that nature. And I actively engaged. And so we was reading in class, looking for root words and things of that nature. And that's how I supported reading. And so what I wasn't looking for is proficiency, it was learning goals, or learning gains that correlate in what we see in the reading scores. And then I can take that tangible to that information to my principal and say, this is what my class is doing. Not only am I touching those band students, but I was a chorus director and I was the payback department chair. So I made my entire department in dance, in drama, in art, all actively engaged in the idea of what are you doing to significantly impact the school grade. Within 2 years, we went from an F to a B. Now, here's the truth of the matter. It's not what you did solistically by yourself that changed the school grade, but what your principal cannot deny is you did something. That, then he said, I'm gonna give you an extra $5,000 in the budget this year. Okay, great. And so I didn't ask him for money. I just showed him how I'm helping him fulfill his vision.
Right on. That's powerful. We only have about 4 minutes left, but I just want to just touch upon, I wrote some notes here. You went from 230 students to now we have currently almost 600 students. What was the pulse of the community when they heard that you were expanding the electives, since Nims had little to none? If you can just kind of wrap that up for us in a like sort of gift parting way.
It was significant. The arts community, because what happens in Title I schools is the first thing when you come into a DA status or a low performing school, the first thing to go is the arts. And so here you have this principal who's coming through the door at this D school and has to change the game. And then he's talking about the arts. What is that about? That's not going to help the school. And then the arts community wake up and say, how can I support you? What can I give you? The community came out, we did a drive for instruments. People bought us instruments that was in the attic and things of that nature. I started a chorus program from scratch. All of those things were significant. And the only request I had of my music teachers is help us get to this grade. How can you do that in your class? If you're going to teach voice, you're teaching chorus, and you're going to be teaching Latin, a Latin piece, then translate that to what they need to hear and know on the FSA exam. That significantly helped our school, which ultimately I've maintained a C ever since then. And then the support keeps running in because they're saying he's doing something right, let's support him. So I never asked for money. I just simply gave them a means to an end. They saw the success of it and they had to support at that point. That makes the superintendent support. So now all of the schools in our city, in our county, because our superintendent, and I speak on these arts issues at our school board meeting and things of that nature, every school, secondary school in my county, get $25,000 to support the arts because of the information that I share quite frequently on how actively engaging in performing arts support the idea of school grade. Every school, middle school and high school, get $25,000 to be used for the arts. And we put $1 million into that budget line. And all it takes is active engaging and getting those principals, assistant superintendents and superintendents to actually understand what the study says. And if you do the study, and it's, the information is out there, if you do it, you'll see significant growth in your schools.
Absolutely. Wow, that was great. I really appreciate that, and I'm pretty sure all of our stakeholders here just really and it just embrace that sort of response, and that's really good to know as you're trying to open up a program from ground zero. You know, on behalf of the Nat King Cole Generation Hope, we want to thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your time today, Dr. Bolden. I can't thank you enough. We are very grateful of that. Thank you again. We will now take a very short break, coffee, tea, stretching, anything you need to refresh yourself before our next session, and we will start promptly at 2 p.m. Thank you again, Dr. Bolden.
Thank you.